Hey, everybody, welcome. We are here to review episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery. I know I got to be joined on the bridge with good people because I can't handle it all by myself. And David Griffin is here with me. Ba-boom.
Hey, what's happening?
Yeah.
We talk about Star Trek.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I'm still not used to saying, hey, we are here to talk about a new Star Trek episode.
Right.
Especially we just got back from New York Comic-Con, and Robert, we were telling you about that, and we got to see a panel there, which was pretty fantastic.
We did.
So, yeah, I'm excited.
Well, as David just alluded to.
Spoiler. Sorry, thank you, Cody.
Robert Meyer Burnett is back this week again to talk about Star Trek Discovery, and we are so happy to have him back. Welcome back, Robert.
It's great to be back. It's so funny to hear you say that it's good to once again talk about Star Trek. I don't think that there's been an hour of my life since I was about 3 that I have not thought about Star Trek.
Wow.
I think about Star Trek all the time.
Wow.
And, a lot of people might say that's obsessive and weird, and it is. But it's just the bane of my existence or the joy of my existence, depending.
So you're like, give me the Gerber baby food. Give me the Gerber baby food. Yeah, 3 years old. Well, this episode was called The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. It's very Shakespearean, which we know Star Trek always delves into. So this felt that way. And there were certainly a bunch of butchers and a bunch of lambs in this episode. A lot happened. We got some more fleshed out relationships with the Klingons. We got some more stuff going on with Michael and Burnham and what her whole role is going to be here. We saw some stuff. We saw some more layers to Lorca. We saw some things going on. And we got our glimpse into our first gay couple on Star Trek, which David and I, when we were at the panel at New York Comic-Con, Wilson Cruz alluded to.
Both guys from Rent.
Yes,
both
guys, Anthony Rapp and Anthony.
Yeah,
Wilson took over Nelson took over for Heredia. Wilson, I think Heredia, who was the original Angel, and then Wilson took over for him. So yeah, definitely two people from Rent, and so to see that going through. So there was a lot that happened in this episode. A lot, there was the creature was being used to make the ship go into different places and fight against the Klingons. So we have a lot to explore here, a lot to unpack. So let's just start from the beginning, and I want to start with Robert Meyer Burnett, if we could. Robert, what did you think about this episode? Overall feeling?
Well, I think this show's rather strange, to be honest.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, it's beautifully made.
Yes.
And I am enjoying the evolution of the cast. And this episode really felt like a fifth season Next Generation episode written by Brandon Braga, if you're a fan of his.
Nice.
But the Brandon Braga of Realm of Fear, where you're being beamed and there's creatures in the transporter beam. That was one of those episodes. But there's a lot of strange things happening in this show. Suddenly, the Discovery we saw turns into a giant gyroscope.
Yes.
The whole saucer section spins around,
that's interesting, yeah.
which kind of neat to look at. Don't really understand the practicality of that, but it was really, really interesting. I think that there's a lot of heady episode ideas here. As I like to call him, the tardigrade. The tardigrade actually was originally, when the show was originally being pitched by Brian Fuller, and when they were developing the show, the tardigrade was first going to be a crew member, an actual Discovery crew member about the humanoid size, but they figured it couldn't be done on a weekly budget. But I have to say, the tardigrade effects were great.
Yeah.
I mean, they really looked, especially when it was fully illuminated and not in the shadows. That's really hard to do. And when Burnham was talking, when it was in the container, the Star Trek II warp field, the spore container. It was really, really beautifully rendered. I mean, a really nice creature design, and it definitely had a lot of Horta to it. The Horta from Devil in the Dark, the original series episode Devil in the Dark. And there was a lot of Dune, third stage, fourth stage guild navigator to that character. I mean, I do like the idea of this creature that sort of navigates the highways and byways of the universe using the same spore technology that the Enterprise, because why wouldn't there be sentient beings that could do that? But it's a little hard to stomach, a little hard to swallow for me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
We were talking about how, your theory, Robert, about this being something to do with the mirror universe, because that technology, at least in the Star Trek universe that we know, never worked.
Yeah.
As far as we know.
Right.
But, hey, maybe in future episodes, whether this is a mirror universe or not, maybe the ship will be destroyed and all that technology be lost, and then no one will ever find that again. But there's always ways they can make it fit within the universe. But I really like the development of Sonequa Martin Green's character, Michael Burnham, with Saru.
Right.
Because they picture her as this really cold, non-feeling type of character, which we know she's not. We know that she cares for her former mentor and captain, what's her name?
Georgiou.
Georgiou.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting name, Georgiou, Philippa Georgiou. And like, she knows she cares for her and also cares for this creature that she doesn't want to see tortured and taken advantage of. You know, even though Saru's like, you're still the same person that I know you to be. I don't trust you. You're all about getting to the point. But you know that she cares about what's going on. And she's not war first. I thought at first she's like, fire first, you know, ask questions later. Right. I think she would rather find probably a peaceful solution because she's obviously not like the captain of Discovery, like Jason Isaacs' character.
No, well, I mean, what did you think? I mean, I felt like they've enslaved this poor creature.
Yes.
I mean, this creature is an intelligent creature, obviously, that was boxed in. How did you feel about the fact that, I mean, they've really pretty much enslaved a sentient being?
Yes, they have. And you saw through Michael that she was very, very conflicted about it. And I think this is the vehicle that the tardigrade serves. We're supposed to, initially we are introduced to Michael Burnham, who's doing a mutiny. We've never seen, she's the first mutineer. The way she does, we all love Michelle Yeoh as the captain, and to see her take things in her own hands in such a violent way, such a forceful way, was really unsettling. And it was ballsy to begin a show with someone who's a lead character who does something really unsavory, really beyond the pale, violating, in essence, the sovereignty of a person by using the Vulcan pinch, knocking her out, and trying to take over her ship, right? So then we have to redeem her. And so by doing this in the third episode, they kind of slowly started the process of redeeming her. Lorca wanting to bring her on the ship, Saru saying that she has her purposes when she's a focused officer, and then we see this further here in this episode because Landry is such an a-hole, so to speak, because she comes in, she always talks down to Burnham, and then she makes Michael open the thing, says it's just going to sedate the tardigrade. The tardigrade comes out and tears her to pieces. Michael, when they're using the tardigrade to go to this colony, to save this colony from the Klingon attack, she is incredibly conflicted by this, and that speaks to not only her humanity, which is within her, because obviously even though she was raised Vulcan, she's still human. It still speaks to her, but I also think it's a smart move by them narratively. I think if it had been a human being or some kind of human-like creature, I don't think it would have felt as powerful to see a defenseless creature being used in this way, and especially later when Michael walks back into the containment room and tries to give the creature the spores and whatever to kind of make it up to it, and the creature is now hesitant, doesn't trust Michael, and does not want to be used in this way. And you heard the wails of this. And Star Trek has a history of doing this, like you mentioned with the Horta. There's
Star Trek 4.
Or Star Trek 4, right? Exactly.
There be whales here.
There be whales.
Well, it's funny.
So I like the idea narratively that you're giving her some things to do here. And I thought it worked for Lorca as well, because what I think the show is setting up is they introduce you with a mutiny. And I said this on our breakdown of the panel from New York Comic Con. She starts as a mutineer, and the show seems to be going full circle that she may have to commit mutiny again against Lorca, because Lorca, when he's yelling at Paul Stamets, Anthony Rapp's character, says very clearly, this is no longer a science ship. So get off or get on board.
I want to hear your opinion. Can we talk about Anthony Rapp's character? I like him a lot as Paul. He gives the captain so much attitude. And Jason Isaacs' character feels like the captain who would shoot you if you disobeyed him, and he gives him so much attitude. I'm like, why is he so lenient with him? Because every time he asks Anthony Rapp to do something, he gives him attitude. I'm like, that's your superior officer. If you're going to follow in the lines of Battlestar Galactica and shows like that, there's consequences for talking back to your captain. Or maybe they're setting something up for a future episode.
Well, one of the things that I've always said about Star Trek, one of the great appeals to me when I was growing up is that the characters on Star Trek were always the best. The crews of the starships, the Federation, Deep Space Nine, whatever, were always the best at what they did. Yeah. They were the best of humanity. These are the people that put in the time, that did the work. You had to be great to be on a starship on the edges of the final frontier, pushing human knowledge. And I think that one of the things that I don't like about this show is the fact that they have this. It's one thing to have arguments like McCoy, Spock, and Kirk were over ethics or morality, but when there's insubordination happening within the ranks of the Discovery, you're at war.
Yep.
Yeah. Whether you want to be or not. It's like when they brought Captain Jellicoe in the 6th season of Next Generation in Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. Captain Jellicoe was not the nice guy that Picard was, and Riker says, there's no joy in what you do. And he's like, look, man, this is a wartime ship here. The Cardassians, there's no time to mess around. So the fact that there's this kind of insubordination on the ship is weird. I understand he's a scientist, and they're trying to bring out that military science conflict, but it seems like this is not the time, and we're in 6 months into a war with the Klingons. So that aspect of the show, it seems a bit forced to me.
But I also think a captain knows how to best use and motivate people in different ways. The best coaches
Yeah.
motivate athletes on their teams in different ways. In business, the best managers, the best owners, they know how to manage their people and motivate them in different ways. Him doing the all hail and playing that the audio of that colony being attacked, the child crying, he knew how to get to Paul Stamets' character. And maybe he felt that maybe there's something in history in Paul Stamets' character in the back of him that relates to that situation in some way. So maybe that's being brought out. But you're right, David. There is insubordination going on here. So I want to find out if Lorca was put in command and their original captain was replaced by Lorca. So they're all having trouble assimilating to his idea. But like you see this when he does when he did the simulation, he says to them, "This is a wartime ship. You all would be dead right now." Right? There is this is his mentality to prepare them. And at the panel, when we were at the panel, when Jason Isaacs was asked about Lorca, he said Lorca thinks everyone on the ship are idiots. He specifically said verbatim, idiots, and that he's the only one who's ready to do what needs to be done because it is wartime.
Robert, sorry, I don't want to keep interviewing you, but I want to ask you one more thing. It's a very interesting thing that was said at the panel. A fan came up and asked this question. Like I said, even for me, still watching this show, I'm not going to keep saying this show is not a Star Trek show, but it doesn't feel like a Star Trek show to me. It doesn't mean it's not Star Trek. It's just I'm a sucker for nostalgia. So for me, it doesn't feel like the Next Generation. It's like a Star Trek from the new generation. But I'm still enjoying the series a lot. Yeah. One of the fans asked, like, what's up with the show being so dark? And I love one of the producers' answers is he said, look, imagine if Kirk, I can't remember the episode he mentioned. You'll remember it.
Sitting on the Edge Forever.
Right.
What happened with Joan Collins.
And now imagine if he had to deal with the death of Joan Collins in the next episode and for the rest of the entire season. Because this is not a procedural, it's a completely serialized television series. If someone dies or some tragedy happens, they don't wake up and there's like a new case to solve or a new plan. It's like, no, you're still dealing with the death of your former captain or your former lover. So that is fascinating. He said that's the reason why the show is so dark or darker, because people have to deal with emotions. Kirk can't lose a loved one, and then the next week's like, all right, Spock, what are we going to do today? They can't do that anymore. So I thought that was a very good response to that question.
Look, I think that is a good response. But if you think The Atlantic published a great article this weekend about a Deep Space Nine two-parter called Past Tense,
I remember that,
where they go back, Cisco goes back in time and it deals with the homeless problem in San Francisco. And if you watch that two-part episode, it's incredibly sprawling in how it deals with homelessness, and it's become more prophetic as the years go by. More so now, somebody said that half of San Francisco looks like that episode today.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think the real thing that I'm wondering about Discovery is, I know it's a serialized show, but we've now spent 2 episodes dealing with a spore drive. And, you look at old Star Trek episodes and you think how sprawling some of those stories would be in the space of an hour. And I'm just wondering their choice, like the original concept of Discovery, the way it was originally written, the 13 episodes were originally written, and they're using those stories to base the show on, had a lot to do with the mirror universe.
Yeah.
And, Lorca, clearly, he's collecting weapons. I think they're dropping a lot of hints that, just like in the great Deep Space Nine two-parter in Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light, people that we thought we knew, the main characters, had been replaced. And we've been watching people. It would not surprise me if Lorca is the mirror version of Lorca. Because originally the spore drive was supposed to punch through space-time to get into Klingon territory, and now they've changed it around. But he's not a nice dude. And when you walk into that room and you see, I love weapons of war, and he's collecting all the weapons. That is not necessarily, Kirk, yes, he had some guns in his trophies in his apartment. But Lorca, I think, wouldn't it be cool if it's the mirror Lorca that's running the Discovery, and then we find out we know they're going to the mirror universe? What if the Lorca? What if the mirror universe started the war?
Well, I'm still in the place, and I get that's a great point, Robert. You bring it. It's certainly possible, but I'm still in that place of like, look, these are Klingons. And we see this going on because Klingons were originally meant to kind of coincide with what's happening in the Cold War. They were meant to stand in for the Russians, for us in America, in the original series. So here we go again with this race. And one of the things that was brought up in the panel as well was, are Klingons going to be the standard evil thing? They're darker skinned. They brought up a lot of this stuff, which I thought was really interesting. There are old complaints about Klingons that have been going on for decades about how they're portrayed. But we get a little more in this episode. We get a little more of the relationship between Vok and L'Rell. and Cole coming in, getting on his knee, saying, last we saw Cole, he was like insulting Vok, but he gets on his knee and he says, forgive me, blah, blah, blah. And then L'Rell gives this like a little information about herself, that she's half one house and half this other house that is from the swindlers and the liars.
I do like
and
the houses. That's cool, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very
And so
cool.
we get a little more of the relationship. And so when they take this, you would get this love relationship, which we don't really get a lot.
You don't see Klingons in love a lot.
You don't really see that a lot. So you see the progression of it. So from my opinion, we're seeing two sides of the same coin, in that Lorca is just as evil or manipulative as any of the Klingons as Cole is, because he's trying to force these people to be a certain way on the ship. Whereas Vok is pursuing his.
He's a true believer.
He's
a man of faith. Yeah, he's a man of faith.
And we see this, and L'Rell. Now we see them stranded on the Jeru, the ship. And what does this mean? You know,
I still don't trust her.
Yeah, there's,
I know you don't trust her.
See, there's a lot of things that I bump on. I'm all about verisimilitude, and Star Trek to me has always been a period piece about a future that doesn't exist. Right. So it's all mythical and it's all allegorical. But when I watch things like these, Klingons have been adrift, they say, for 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, and they're scavenging whatever they can find. Like, they can't call other Klingons and say, hey, man, can you bring us we need a warp
because the
field
navigation system was working, because they were like looking at the map. I'm like, well, if the map works, it's like the Wi-Fi worked. You know,
yeah, I mean, they called all the Klingon houses and they showed up pretty quick.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, maybe we could use this ship. It's got a cloaking device. I mean, what's going on? So there's all this strange stuff that happens. Like, I don't believe, it's hard for me to believe that the head of security on the Discovery just gets dumb.
Yeah.
We're going to sedate a life form we've never seen before. We have no idea what it does. And I'm just going to march right in there after it's killed Klingons that were armed with batleths. I'm just going to walk in with my pulse weapon or whatever, and then she gets devoured.
It's one of those dumb horror story moves. And in a horror movie, it works because it's always like kids or young people that are in over their heads. Well, like you said, these are the best of the best. They shouldn't make
they shouldn't make
like
these
that,
mistakes. I mean, if you're watching, like with Equinox, the Voyager episode where the Starfleet crew goes nuts, or you're watching Ron Tracy and the Omega Glory. I mean, there's reasons why Starfleet captains go nuts.
Yeah.
Commodore Decker, his whole crew was on the third planet, dies, wants to destroy the Doomsday Machine. There's no call for idiocy in Star Trek. And I just am like, this seems like convenient narrative, lazy writing. Let's just kill somebody to kill. Ooh, we killed one of our main characters. How edgy. But you killed her in such a way that makes her look dumb. And that bothers me.
Well, they did. I didn't think they spent enough time fleshing her character out anyway.
She's a pretty good actress. I mean, she had a big role in Battlestar Galactica. So I was surprised they got rid of her so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, and maybe it is to kind of move her out of the way, and they felt that it was being too much of a one note kind of, and nothing against her as an actress. It was just the character itself felt very one note. There was no complexity to her. There was no like vulnerability or a moment where she let her guard down. Even in her, there was no conversation with her and Lorca where you sensed that there was some kind of connection other than her being in servitude to him. There might have been something where in his quarters, and she has a moment where she lets her guard down. We could have felt the death more powerfully. In this way, we could have seen the logic of why she wanted to go in and fight this thing, control this, because she just tells Michael, like, we're going to do this because Lorca says we're going to do this. So, and he put me down here to make sure you stay on task. So there was no levels to her character. There's nothing against the actress. It's just the way it was written. So I think it was smart in a way to get rid of her. Yes, to me, I agree with you. Absolutely. I think it was a very dumb way to die. And I felt it was not in service of the show overall as in a narrative way, but I think it was smart to move her up because you kind of now don't have a buffer between Michael and Lorca. Now there's this thing where they have to slam heads and bang heads, and Michael is very conflicted about what they're doing with the...
Well, see, I think the show in its conception is very interesting, and it's very compelling.
It's not safe.
No, it's
not a safe
which
show.
I enjoy.
It's not safe, but I do think that what it's missing is joy.
Right.
You know, Star Trek, even at its darkest, even in the middle of the Dominion War, when planets were getting wiped out, or things like this, the Borg, there was always a certain joie de vivre that went along with watching Star Trek. Even
that's French for you kids.
When
at home,
even when Garrick would say something crazy, and you'd realize something bad was happening. Or I loved in Homefront, the Deep Space Nine episode. You know how many changelings there are on Earth? 4.
Right.
You know, there's 4 changeling, and that, even though they're at war, that's you're kind of going, oh, it's fun.
Yes.
I don't know if this show is fun yet. Yeah, and I don't mean fun like, oh, it's got to have the Mugatu jumping on you, because that's not my Star Trek. I don't necessarily. I want something that's serious and thoughtful, but there has to be something uplifting.
Well, I think the fun is Cadet Tilly. Whereas she's the comic relief to a degree.
How did she get on that ship?
Yeah, that's
Well,
a
we
good
know
question.
she's
How
shady.
did she get on the
She
ship?
had that knowing grin that one episode. I was like, she knows something.
There's more to play with Cadet Tilly, and I think having her on kind of brings levity to your talk. But I get your point. I'm still enjoying it, and it's already been greenlit for a second season. So apparently, a lot of people are enjoying it, and so and I know they're spending the money. And they were asked this at the panel too. Why should we pay? How would you explain this? How would you convince your friends? They asked the people on the panel to pay for this, to pay for the CBS All Access, and they all said the level of production is very high here, and that's what you're paying for. And I agree. Like we were talking off camera.
It's Game
the
of Thrones
visuals,
level night. I mean, it's $8.5 million almost per episode.
Yeah.
It's the most expensive Star Trek show ever made.
and it
It's
certainly
incredible.
shows.
Yeah.
I just think the only thing I'm paying for CBS All Access. I mean, you go if you see Blade Runner 2 twice in IMAX.
Yeah.
they're
I'm going to
You
see it for
paid
the
for it,
second
yeah,
time
yeah.
tonight. Yeah.
Well,
See, once you've already paid for it.
Yeah.
I only think that the only problem that I have with paying for the show is that CBS All Access as a platform in the United States does not offer multi-channel sound the way I'm watching it through my computer.
Oh, yeah.
And the streaming, it's not up to 1080p standards. We're not getting the kind of quality that you would get with, say, Netflix in Europe.
Amazon Prime.
And I'm not getting my money's worth in that respect.
Okay.
I'll buy the Blu-ray.
Right.
4K disc.
Did you guys like the softer notes of her opening the last will and testament of Captain Georgiou and what she left her, the telescope? Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, because I like the fact that I think she said something like, don't ever lose your zest or your passion, your zeal for exploration. And a telescope is all about exploring. It's about, Robert, it's about looking out to the stars, asking what's beyond, what's out there. Like that's what, there was one, I think it was a movie, it was an Enterprise movie, and Picard's like, let's see what's out there. That whole thing, and they go into warp. I mean, that's what Star Trek is. So they're still honoring the past. They're not forgetting it. Like, this is a war first series. They're honoring the past, and that was that was a nice way of honoring the past.
The only thing, which I completely agree with you, I thought that was great, but the thing that went through my mind is, well, how did the post office know to get it to the Discovery? Like, how was this mailed to her? Like, how did they find...
Like a return, it's like, sorry, could not find.
And there are things that go through each one of these episodes so far where I'm like, really? Like, this is a super secret ship where you're the test bed of this incredible propulsion system, but apparently you can send stuff to people there.
Okay.
Like, we can find you in space. Maybe it was on the prison shuttle, or maybe it was, or maybe they just, brought it in with Spore Drive. It had its own little...
It's Amazon Prime, same day shipping.
Yeah.
Next day, week. Yeah, it's like same day.
You
Yeah.
just have a little bit of
Look it up
Spore,
again.
a little bit of Spore. You just type in where you want to go, hit a button, and bam, it materializes Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, one thing real quick.
Whatever you want.
Okay.
I've never seen this before in a series. I don't think I have. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Hold
Robert, you
on.
would know
Let
better.
me finish
Oh,
this
sorry.
point and we'll jump on yours. Real quick. Who brought that in?
Oh,
Tilly.
Tilly, yeah.
We don't know what her role is
I
on
think
this
Tilly's
just
a
yet.
spy.
So maybe Tilly
Tilly's a
knew all
spy.
this stuff. She's manipulating Michael in a certain way. So that's what I think is the answer. And I agree with you. You can certainly question it right now,
Right.
but maybe answer down the road. So what were we going to say, David?
I had never seen in-ship beaming. I've never
Yes,
seen that
which
before.
was
Like she's like,
awesome.
all right, to the medical bay, and they beam to the medical bay. I've never
love
seen
that.
that.
Well,
before.
no, they
Emergency.
Have they done that before? I'm sure
they've done it before.
Okay.
They've done it
Okay.
before on a few episodes in a few of the series, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not something that's normally used because, and that's another thing about Star Trek technology is something that, like, transport technology has rules. Otherwise, it's magic.
Yep.
And in Into Darkness, when Khan beams from the cockpit of his snub fighter to the Klingon homeworld, it's like you've taken the verisimilitude of a transporter and changed it and turned it into something magical.
Right.
I don't like when that goes on because part of the rules of that technology makes the universe believable.
Yeah.
And with transporter technology being site to site, a ship has to be in geosynchronous orbit or at least somewhat around where you're beaming a person to. If suddenly the transporter becomes a magical device, then the believability goes away for me.
That's what I liked about Enterprise, the series, the last Star Trek series, is that remember there was consequences. People were could die or not come back. I mean, they hadn't perfected the technology yet. Yeah.
No, and Star Trek: The Motion Picture opens with a horrible
Yes.
transporter
Oh,
disaster.
my God. That's
What we got back didn't live long, fortunately. I mean,
Yeah,
ugh,
that's
awful.
dark, yeah.
Death by
It's
transporter.
like Seth Brundle's working those things. Listen, I love the reference to Zephram Cochrane in this. That was nice.
And Elon Musk.
Elon
Yeah, I was
Musk
like,
thrown in there.
I was like, yeah, yes,
I love
modern.
that
Yeah,
idea. Yeah, definitely. And I also enjoyed this whole Corvan too is where the dilithium crystals, home of dilithium crystals. All that played out. We've heard that name before, that planet, or the
40% of
colony
all
before.
the.
Right. Right. And of course, it says here, one of the miners killed on Korvan was called Zaphod. Now, what does that mean? Because that could be a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Right? It could be anything.
Yeah,
I love this because
People right. The president of the galaxy is now dead.
Yeah.
Because he was on Korvan.
we killed
too.
that universe because
Yeah.
Paul Stamets is also a reference to, he's named after Paul Stamets,
Yeah.
who did a number of TED Talks about mushrooms and how mushrooms can save the world. And
Well, there's been a lot
of this reference to stuff.
There's a long history of references, like in Next Generation.
Yeah.
There was the Starship Yamato. That
Oh,
was
yes.
from Space Battleship Yamato, and there's all kinds of name drops and things that happen. There's a long tradition of that in Star Trek, so it's nice to see that continuing.
Okay, so one thing I do want to talk about, what do you think now, because we got to wrap this up soon, as we see the Klingon story playing out? Like, I know you don't trust Varel right now, David. How is this going to play out? Do you think they're going to find a way to, because one of the coolest things about the show that I thought in the last episode, other than the in-ship beaming up, was the way that they were able to spin the ship around, Discovery into, I was like, this is badass. Now, maybe I'm not as steeped in the tradition enough of Star Trek. I love Star Trek to pieces, but maybe I'm not as steeped enough to understand it. Well, that's not really something that was done, blah, blah, blah. But these are new things, and they're playing with this. And this relationship between Varel and Vok, is this something they're going to be playing with even further? And how are they going to get out of this situation?
Well, I think they absolutely are. I mean, we're actually delving into, you didn't see a lot of. There was the Klingon Civil War in Next Generation, and you did see the Klingons battling the Federation and starting in Way of the Warrior and fourth season of Deep Space Nine. But you've never seen it like this. You've never seen a real deep dive look at the Klingons before, which is interesting. I do think the fact that they're only speaking Klingon, I think it makes
that, yeah.
Well, but for the audience, I think it's hard because and actors too. How do actors convey information with the made-up language? It's hard for them, and their makeups are so thick.
Yeah.
And Michael Dorn had a terrible time just talking over his teeth in Next Generation. And these actors, I think, are being done. You got to go hunt for Red October at some point, where you do the little push in, they're speaking Russian.
Oh, yeah.
And then it changes to English.
yeah.
And because you've got to give these actors, it's hard for them to, I think, emote or play.
They talk about that in the panel.
Yeah, they did.
talk about
Yeah,
that.
or even being, I mean, the Klingons, especially in Deep Space Nine, were so much fun. Even Kor, the first time you see John Colicos as Kor in Errand of Mercy in the first season of the original series, when he talks at the end of the episode, he says to Kirk, the Organians have stopped the war, and Kor smiles and said, yes, but it would have been glorious.
And then in the movie,
And you don't get, those Klingons can never talk that way, so you can never, they're not quotable.
Like Christopher Plummer was the only one that could
Undiscovered
really-
Country was the best. Like, you've never really heard Shakespeare until you've heard it in the original Klingon. Like, it's so good.
See, but you
love
can
that.
quote that.
Yeah,
You're not going
right.
to be quoting Takuma's followers anytime soon.
But Mary Chieffo, who plays Laurel on the show, she was on the panel, and she said, we spent extra hours learning how to speak this language, not just how to speak it, but also what it means. And so we as actors are spending extra time, the Klingon people, in the makeup chairs, speaking to each other in this dialogue, running over the scenes so that we can invest the right amount of emotion. And I think it worked this episode, because when they're having their kind of pseudo Klingon courtship, which isn't what you see in When Harry Met Sally, it's like a legitimate, like a harder edge type thing with
physical
innuendos and
creature,
subtle stuff.
yeah.
I completely bought it. And when you see her turn on him, I completely bought Vok's like a complete anger and frustration. And when she shows up back on the ship, when he starts to choke her, you buy that whole thing because they've laid the groundwork of the emotion, and Cole as well, who is a Klingon a-hole among Klingon a-holes. Like, it's just really bad in that way. No honor, no dignity to that guy. And so I think that speaks to the actors' credits that they do spend extra time working on this thing. But you're right in this idea. How many people want to read subtitles?
Well, it goes back to one of my favorite things that's ever been broadcast on network television is Shogun, the miniseries Shogun. And in that, what was genius was this character goes to Japan, and Richard Chamberlain plays this character, and they don't subtitle the Japanese.
Right.
So you, as a viewer, and Richard Chamberlain, the character, are sort of learning Japanese together.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, But it's just these long passages of Klingon, which are cool.
Yeah.
But as the viewer, you're wondering, you're reading.
Yeah.
And I think that they might be doing the viewers a disservice ultimately.
Yeah.
Because even the Lakota in Dances with Wolves eventually can speak a little English.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Well, I'm enjoying what's happening with it, and maybe because I enjoy watching French films and Russian films and watching subtitles. But like one last thing I do before we wrap up here, Saru, it occurred to me throughout the show that maybe Saru is the hero of this entire show, which was really weird for me because that's my standard way of looking at someone who is doing all the right things, has a code, has an ethic, doesn't believe. Like Michael used her with his threatening, like he came
ganglia.
down. Yeah, her threat ganglia. She kind of in essence used him, and he said that you haven't changed one damn bit, and that tells you something, that this man is this character
seems to be the most rational person.
Yes, and consistent.
Yeah.
Consistent. Everyone else seems to have these agendas to play, and he may end up being the actual hero of this entire season.
Star Trek has always had a long tradition of the writing staff being attracted to writing for the aliens, the hero aliens of the show, and I think Saru is probably the best written character. And obviously quickly becoming a fan favorite.
Yeah, Doug Jones is just doing such great work with that.
So great. And it's great to see Doug Jones hearing his own voice, seeing him act, even though he's under makeup, he's got prosthesis. It's really great to see him in a role like this, front and center, because he's great.
Okay. Any final thoughts on the episode before we wrap up here?
I'm enjoying this. I'm still not sure what I'm seeing, but I'm fascinated and intrigued. I don't go into an episode, I don't press the play button on my PlayStation for CBS All Access like, all right, here we go. I'm like, what are we going to see this week? Because I don't really know.
Right.
I don't know where this is going. I'm not predicting what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, to me, look, I had a hard time being the canonista and canon pornographer that I am. I had a real hard time overcoming so much of the show. Right. But watching it, to me, it feels like this strange, weird, Baroque. The Seattle Opera once did a retelling of The Ring of the Nibelung as a sci-fi epic. I feel like I'm watching some weird Baroque opera about Star Trek that's got clockwork starships and
Elseworld story.
Yeah, now that I'm putting aside my initial just seething anger over so much of this, and I can sit down and go, all right, I'm just going to watch this for what it is. Then I start to enjoy it because it's wacky.
Yeah.
It's a really wacky show, and I'm wondering, where's this going to go next? Right. I mean, there's a tardigrade that's a 4th Stage Guild navigator from Dune. Okay, what are they going to do? It's nutty stuff.
Yeah. Well, to me, they had to come back with something that was completely different, in my opinion, to like reinvigorate the franchise, get new generation involved, and I feel like this show has done, at least for me, to this point, it has done it. So we'll see where they go from here. We do get Klingons speaking English in the next episode. We see what Lorca's captured, so we'll see more of that, how that plays out. Yeah, right.
It's the whole thing. If you're a
they
Japanese,
killed my son. Let them die. Let them die.
I just keep. This is gonna make. I'm such a nerd, but I love Gundam, Mobile Suit Gundam.
Oh yes,
and there's a Gundam series called Turn A Gundam, which is very weird and offbeat and Baroque and like a period piece. This Star Trek Discovery is the Turn A Gundam of Star Trek.
Done.
I'm saying it right now. People are gonna be like, "What are you talking about?" But some people will, like the 4 people, will go, "You're right."
All right, well, that's our review of Episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery. Thank you so much for taking time to watch us. Leave comments below. Maybe you've got some other theories of your own, some other ideas that may be going on with these characters, and some other stuff that even Robert Meyer Burnett may not have possibly thought of, which I find impossible, but you never know. So leave comments below on YouTube. Let's go around the table, see where everybody can find you. David, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at GriffinDE.
And my man, Robert Meyer Burnett.
You can find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, and remember the hashtag #FreeSpaceWaterBear. He must be released. Find me on Instagram at RM Burnett, or find me on Facebook at Robert Meyer Burnett.
There you go. You guys can also find me at The Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram. See all the shows we're doing here on Collider as well, here on the Collider Network. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next week for Episode 5.
Hey everybody, Josh McCouga here. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Collider TV Talk. Want to watch more episodes? Click there. It's an interactive link. Or for more Collider content, click down there. Subscribe to the channel. Tell all your friends. Get an airplane. Drive it by that says Collider. I'm not telling you to buy an airplane. Just do whatever you want as long as you're watching Collider video.